to Cattle Chat this afternoon. We've got two topics that we're going to be discussing today. First off, we're going to have Dr. Wayne Tomlinson, our provincial veterinarian with the department, talking about the importance of colostrum and a few things there. And then after that, we will have Shawn Cabak, farm production advisor out of Portage. He'll be talking a bit about some tips and things to keep in mind as we get into feeding cows leading up to calving, and then once they've calved, some things to think about there. So as we go through the webinar, like Linda said, if you've got any questions, just type them in, and we can open it up for questions once each presentation is over, and have a bit of back and forth question and answer period there. And so from that, I guess we'll start off with Wayne. If Linda, you want to give the screen sharing over to Wayne, and he can get started into his presentation.
Can everybody see my screen?
Okay,
yes, we
can. I can see it, so I think we should be good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. We're good to start then. Welcome, everybody. This is a little new to me. I've done one of these before, but so I'm a little bit, I don't want to say nervous, but I'm not sure how all the technology is going to work. It's a little bit awkward talking to a screen instead of an audience, but I'll try to do my best for you. You can see the first slide here that half the calves that are going to get sick in the first 3 weeks of birth, and our biggest mortality happens again either in the first 24 hours after birth, with half of them there. The rest that are going to die again are going to die within the first 21 days. Now, there's lots of reasons why this happens, but one of the biggest reasons that we see animals that are dying within the first 3 weeks of life is through a failure of passive immunity, which comes from their colostrum. There's other things, of course, that cause death loss, infection, dystocia. Just got a window popped up here that I'll get rid of. Okay,
click on the second one.
So there are some other things, as we know, dystocia, weather, certainly. Again, oh, okay, well, next time it pops up, we'll get it. I think I gave it a third one. So let's talk about a couple definitions here, first of all. Antibodies, they're produced by a special white blood cell. That's what WBC stands for. And those are what we call, in the science world, we call those B lymphocytes. Now, they're a special white blood cell, and they produce antibodies. Now, antibodies really are just a protein that attaches onto the bacteria or the virus and neutralizes it. IgG is the most abundant antibody protein, and the reason that I'm mentioning this is because later on in the presentation I'm going to be talking a bit about IgG, because that's what we measure when we're seeing if a calf got enough colostrum and has enough immunity. FPT is failure of passive transfer. Now, passive transfer is the result of adequate colostrum. So when there's failure of passive transfer, we see IgG levels in less than 10 grams per liter, and that's what we use as a criteria for measuring how much colostrum these calves have received. So, what is colostrum? I think we all know that colostrum is the first milk that we see in mammals. The jug on the right is the colostrum milk. The jug on the left is just regular milk. The colostrum, as you can see, it's a different color. It's thicker. It's richer. It tastes somewhat different than regular milk, and it's important for all mammals, but it's more important in some species than others. So, true colostrum has twice as much dry matter, so it's got a lot more in it than just water, as opposed to regular milk. There's 3 times as many minerals. There's 5 times as much protein. Now, a lot of that protein is immunoglobulins, that we talked about, that IgG. IgG makes up about 80 or 90% of the immunoglobulins in beef and in bovines. It's higher in energy. Now, a lot of that energy is fat rather than sugar, and it's also rich in vitamins. There's a high content of A, D, and E in colostrum, and these are really important because the calf has low amounts. Now, a lot of producers will give a shot of vitamin A and D to calves when they're born, and there's nothing wrong with that. But colostrum does concentrate the vitamin A and D and allows and to meet the calf's needs. Also mention here that the low sugar actually kind of is important because sugar becomes, the lactose becomes a food for bacteria. So in the first few days when we have colostrum, we have a little bit lower sugar level, but we got higher fat, so it's fine. We also got some other nutrient factors, dissolved solids and white blood cells as well. And the white blood cells are important. We'll get to those in a second. So in your this is probably a Holstein milk, this by the look of what it is, but you'll see that the protein here in the protein here is around 14%, whereas in regular milk it's 3.1. The immunoglobulins, the IgG that we were talking about, it's at 48. It's down around 0.6 once we're dealing with regular milk. So this is the first milk, the first milking. It goes down at each time that udder is emptied. It goes down until after the fourth, fifth, sixth milking. It's pretty much the same in here. So you can see there's a big difference in the components of milk. Why do we need colostrum? There's a balance between immunity and pathogen, and if we have enough pathogens, enough bacteria, enough viruses, they're going to overwhelm the calf's immunity. Or if the calf has low immunity, it will not have the ability to fight off even a normal load of bacteria or viruses. So before calves are born, they're in the uterus, and the cervix is at this end, and it's closed, and there's a mucus plug in there, and that pretty much keeps all environment, bacteria, mold, all those sorts of things. So anything that happens to the calf has to come at it through the cow. So if the cow has a good immune system going, very little bacteria or virus should get into the unborn calf. Now you're all familiar with the placenta of a cow. You can see the cotyledons here. This is where it attaches. In cattle, we have these cotyledonary placentation, they call it. So we've got a series of cotyledons. That's the dark red spots on the in the placenta, the afterbirth. In the uterus, we've got corresponding areas. These are called the caruncles, and that's where they're the buttons, and that's where the placenta attaches. In cattle, there's 4 layers of cells in the button, and there's 4 layers of cells in the placenta. So there's 8 layers of cells, and antibodies cannot cross those 4 layers. So during the first, so that calf is born with basically no antibodies in his system. So during the first 24 hours of life, antibodies can cross the gut wall. This represents the gut wall here, and these are the antibodies crossing it. So for the first 24 hours of life, that gut wall is leaky and will allow these antibodies, this immunoglobulin, to be absorbed intact without being broken down. Other large molecules can also cross this leaky barrier, and that includes white blood cells, but it also includes bacteria and viruses. So it's important to know that when the calf is during this critical time, not only does colostrum go across, but also infectious agents can cross as well. Like I said, calves have a naive immune system. They have no immunoglobulins circulating in their bloodstream when they're born. So the colostrum is really, really important because it provides those antibodies to that newborn baby. That's what we call passive transfer. And the reason we call it passive is because those antibodies that the calf has after sucking are not made by the calf, but they're made by made by the cow, and they're absorbed. The other thing that's also absorbed from this are the T and B lymphocytes. We talked about the B lymphocytes. That's where the immunoglobulin is made. We'll mention the T lymphocytes as well. These are a special memory cell, and they're going to go into the calf's bone marrow and trigger some neat things to happen. So this is a feedlot steer, or heifer by the look of it, and in order for it to perform to maximum production in the feedlot, it requires an active immunity. And even though this animal left your farm at 6 or 8 months of age, there is still impact of colostrum happening even at this stage. So colostrum allows for immunity when it's young. Those antibodies will last 6 weeks or so in the animal. But the white blood cells, especially those T lymphocytes that get into the calf's bone marrow, prime the bone marrow for all diseases that the mom has seen. And so that we now know that animals that had adequate colostrum actually do better in the feedlot, even though it's 6 or 8 months later from when they were originally had their colostrum. It's still having an effect on these animals in the feedlot. So, is all colostrum equal? No, it's not. There's a lot of different factors that control the quality of colostrum. So parity. Typically, first calf heifers do not have the same quality of colostrum as older animals. The older animals simply have seen more infections through their life. They've come across more viruses. They will produce a higher quality of colostrum. Nutrition, and Shawn's going to spend a bit of time on this, is extremely important in the quality of the colostrum. So I'll leave that to Shawn. Genetics are also important. Exposure to antigens, and that whether they're natural, so whether it's natural bacteria and viruses, or whether it's through vaccination, will affect the quality of the colostrum. Stress will as well. Animals that are under stress will not produce as good a quality colostrum. Other things that affect the quality are if they're milked out. So sometimes we'll see that cow or heifer and another calf other than hers is sucking. That's going to reduce the quality of the colostrum. An animal with a leaky udder where milk is dripping out prior to calving, that will reduce. So there's a lot of different factors that affect the quality of the colostrum. So how do we measure passive transfer? That's what the PT stands for, is passive transfer. As I said before, anything with an immunoglobulin level, an IgG level, under 10, we consider that failure passive transfer. So we take a blood sample and we look for this IgG and we say that, okay, it's above 10, it's adequate, it's below 10, there's been failure. What makes up the IgG? That's the colostrum quality that we just talked about, times the intake, so how many liters the calf drinks, times the apparent efficiency of absorption. So even though your colostrum has lots of antibodies in it, under most ideal situations, only a third of that is absorbed. So while we may have a lot of antibody in the colostrum, the calf is really only going to absorb a third of it. And then so depending on how many grams of colostrum it actually takes in, we divide that by the plasma volume, and that's where the calculation for IgG comes from. The most common cause of failure of passive transfer is the lack of IgG intake. So simply the calf didn't drink enough, or what it drank was of poor quality. The absorption, that can be an affect the passive transfer as well. And there's lots of different factors that affect closure time in the gut. So I've thrown a little calculation down there on the very bottom. And so if a calf drinks 4 liters of poor quality colostrum, so there's only 25 grams of IgG per liter, the calf will then consume 100 grams, so it's 4 times 25 in the first 24 hours. If a third of that is only absorbed, so it gets about 33 grams or so of of actual IgG is actually absorbed into the calf's bloodstream. Now the calf's bloodstream they're about 9% of their body weight. So if, for simple math, if this animal is 100 pounds or 45 kilos, they will wind up with a passive transfer. So the number that they'll get, their IgG level, if you do the math, you divide that then by the 9%, is you'll wind up with about 8.3. So that animal who had 100 grams of IgG would wind up with an IgG level of 8.5 or so. Contaminants can also influence the quality of colostrum. So if we have mastitis in the milk, if we have bacteria, whether they be on the teat itself or in the milk as well, if we have blood, I think we've all seen some heifers that have a lot of blood in their milk. Those will all affect the quality of the colostrum. And like I wrote here, if the udder is dirty, even if there's good colostrum, it may be overwhelmed by the fact that the calf has got to lick off all that manure and mud that's on the surface of the udder. So when should we feed colostrum? Ideally, we want to feed it as soon as possible after birth. At best, only a third of the antibodies that a calf will consume will reach its bloodstream. The other 2/3 aren't wasted. They're staying in the lumen in the center of the gut, and they're working in there. Those antibodies are working against bacteria that the calf ingests, so they're not lost, but they're not getting into the bloodstream. Within 6 hours, we used to say get it in the first 24 hours, then we said 12, now we're saying 6. Within 6 hours, the ability to absorb colostrum will decrease by a third. By 24 hours, these calves will absorb less than 10% than they originally could have. So if you look at this graph, and I'll see if we can find the pointer here, this is typically about where we're going to get for most. We can get upwards of close to 50% absorption, but that realistically doesn't happen. And then that drops off very, very rapidly. And so that if we're down here 6 hours, we're only absorbing 20% instead of 35%. The rate at which this gut closure happens is variable with calf, from calf to calf. It's going to depend a little bit on the genetics of the calf, how long, just the way it was born. And some calves, even within 10 hours, they stop absorbing the antibodies, the immunoglobulin. But anything that goes into the gut will stimulate that gut to initiate its closure mechanism. So if you give a calf just some regular milk or some electrolytes or something just to tide it over, you got a calf that's born at 4 o'clock in the morning, you don't feel like feeding it, so you just give it some electrolytes. Those electrolytes, that milk, whatever you give that calf, will stimulate the closure of the gut. I used to have one client, he used to like giving raw eggs and whiskey to his calves when they were first born. A practice that I do not recommend because they will cause the gut to start closing. Nursing versus bottle versus a tube. When a calf nurses, like the little fellow on the left, there's a reflex that happens in his stomach, and that's at the base of the esophagus. There's a twisting of a muscle, and it's called the esophageal groove. And what happens when a calf nurses? The milk bypasses the first 3 stomachs and goes straight into the 4th stomach. The same thing happens when he nurses from a bottle, that the milk will go into the 4th stomach instead of the 1st stomach. When we tube a calf, we don't have that same suckling reflex, so that the colostrum is going into the 1st stomach rather than the 4th stomach. Now, that really doesn't matter. Tubing is better than not tubing. Tubing is better than not sucking. But just know that when we tube a calf, it's going in the 1st stomach versus the 4th stomach. And that's a difference of about 3 or 4 hours. The colostrum is absorbed from the small intestine, not from the stomach. So the colostrum's got to go through the first, second, third, fourth stomach, and then into the intestine where it's absorbed. So if we have a calf who nurses, that colostrum will effectively be getting into the gut around 3 or 4 hours faster than if we tube it. So if we know that, we can use this to our advantage, in which case we try to get the calf to suck whenever we can. If for some reason we don't think that calf is going to suck, then we might as well milk the cow or heifer out right away and tube the calf right off the bat. So for instance, a calf being born from a heifer, he's got a swollen head, a swollen tongue. When you pull him out, you realize that that calf is not going to suck right away. So you milk the heifer out, you tube the calf with it. And thereby, so that colostrum is going to hit that small intestine at about 3 or 4 hours after birth. A calf that nurses, it's going to, if it doesn't nurse for the first hour or so, it's only going to get there in 2 or 3 hours. So it's not going to make a heck of a lot of difference. So back to our failure of passive transfer. Here's some numbers that'll help you appreciate how important the colostrum is. Okay, if calves with a low level of IgG, so less than 4, they got a 29% chance of survival. The ones that fall into the range 4 to 10, they have about a 72% chance of survival. So that's still not adequate, but it does increase their chance of survival by a lot. Ones that are in the adequate level, that's 10 to 16, they got a 92% chance. And finally, calves that have a high level of colostrum, and that's what we're starting to shoot for now in our dairy farms, because we do a lot more measuring of it in there, is 16 grams per liter is what we're shooting for. And we find that there's a 94% chance of survival in those animals. So what are the causes of passive transfer? Calves that do not nurse. So that's whether it be from dystocia, like I said, the calf with a swollen tongue. If there's an inattentive mother, so that cow or heifer who drops the calf and walks away, lack of a suckle reflex, that can be from something like white muscle disease, or just a calf that's born in the cold and has lost his reflex. Or it could be from a calf that simply can't find the teat. So a poor, sorry, this is bothering me a little bit. See if we can get rid of this. Oh well, I don't know how to get rid of it. So passive transfer also when they nurse, but there's poor quality colostrum. That's less common. Now that certainly can be in thin cows. It certainly can be in some of our first calf heifers. We'll maybe see perhaps insufficient volume of colostrum. This is a study in some dairy animals. There was some brown Swiss cows. I'm just trying to shrink this down. Sorry. They gave these calves either 1 gallon of colostrum or a ½ gallon right after birth. And the ones that they gave, now my computer is completely frozen up. I apologize here. For some reason I can't get anything to move. I'll reload. I suspect that it's Wednesday afternoon and I am now running a antiviral software. That's usually what happens at noon on Wednesdays. So I'm going to have to try to do something here. Okay, sorry about that. So they gave a half a gallon of colostrum, or they gave 1 gallon. It was a U.S. study, so they gave a gallon instead of 4 liters. What they found out was that the ones that got 1 gallon of colostrum had a lower vet cost. They had 16% increase in survival. 22% of these animals had an increase in growth rate. Okay, so these animals grew 22% faster under the exact same conditions, and it was just from adequate colostrum. And to show how this carries on for the remainder of their life, these animals that got more colostrum actually produced 5% more milk by the end of their second lactation. So what we're recommending for feeding is that calves over 100 pounds, they should get 4 quarts, 4 liters at birth, and another 2 quarts at 12 hours. Calves that are nursing, it's amazing how much these little calves will nurse, these little babies. So a 100-pound calf, if he gets up and nurses, he will take in that amount of liquid if it's available to him. So, a good cow will be able to easily produce a liter per quarter, and these calves will take all of that in. The higher producing cows, they'll have more than that. He may only suck out 2 quarters, but he'll very, very often, he'll suck out 4 liters right away. Calves that are a little bit smaller, so say between 50 and 100 pounds, they would only need 3 quarts at birth and then 2 quarts later. And for the really little ones, some small twins and stuff, 2 quarts at birth is enough, and then another 2 quarts 12 hours later. Good colostrum has 50 grams per liter of immunoglobulins, and that can be measured, and some of the dairy producers do measure their colostrum. It's a big issue in dairy farms where they actually have some of these dairy cows milk too much, and there's too much milk mixed in, and the colostrum gets diluted. So some dairy farmers do actually have a little hygrometer thing that they put into the milk or the colostrum and see exactly if there is enough colostral antibodies present in that milk. And it's strictly a matter of them. These animals are just producing so much milk that the colostrum gets watered down by the regular milk. Not usually an issue with beef cows. What some people don't know, and you guys do, is that antibodies aren't the only thing that's absorbed out of colostrum. Okay, we talked about those white blood cells earlier, those T and B lymphocytes, and they're really, really important because the B lymphocytes are what makes immunoglobulins. Okay, which makes the antibodies. Those will be absorbed intact, and those will start working right away. So those will work for that calf. The T lymphocytes will go into the calf's bone marrow, and it will start telling the bone marrow to start producing B lymphocytes, so the calf's own lymphocytes, which will go into the bloodstream and give that calf protection. So maternal colostrum. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the milk replacers, the colostral replacers. And I really wish I could get rid of this thing so I could give you guys high control panel. Let's try that one. Oh, that worked good. Feeding high quality maternal colostrum is the gold standard. Okay, live, fresh colostrum from your own herd. Your cows know which antibodies the calf is going to require, and those are the ones that the calf needs the most. When we don't have access to quality colostrum, okay, a colostrum replacer can help us out. And now these are these powdered ones. Now we're frozen again. I do apologize for this technical glitches here, but something is going wrong with my computer. Anyway, while I'm looking for that, I will carry on. And we get 2 different kinds of colostrum milk replacers. We have colostrum milk supplements, and we have colostrum milk replacers. Now the supplements are exactly what they say. They're to supplement colostrum, as opposed to the replacers that are designed to be a replacement for colostrum. They're quite different, and so the supplement can be used to replace the colostrum. The replacement can be used to replace sort of the colostrum. The supplement will be only for extra. So say a heifer that had some colostrum but not enough, you could use a supplement, or maybe for the second or third feeding. So if for some reason an animal, whether she died, whether she got away, whatever, the calf can't suck on her because it was injured, those sorts of things, then you would use the supplement for the for those additional feedings. Again, remember that the maternal colostrum is the gold standard, but when we're talking about the replacers, we need to know whether these things are made from real colostrum or is it made from blood serum collected at a slaughterhouse. So the colostrum that are made from serum products, they collect blood at a slaughter plant, typically from cows that are going through slaughter rather than steers, and they will separate the blood and they'll spin it down and they'll collect the antibodies, they'll freeze dry those, and they'll build a milk replacer from those. These products, as opposed to the ones that are made from freeze-dried milk, are often short in some of the other soluble factors that we see in colostrum and the white blood cells that we talked about earlier. They're lost in this process. So the colostrum that comes from milk still has some of these white blood cells in it, just not as many. Typically also these are made from animal fat or vegetable fat as opposed to milk fat, and these fats are less digestible from the calf. So the ones that are made from milk tends to be a little bit better. So when you don't have colostrum available to you, for whatever reason it is, ideally we want to use a replacement, not a supplement. Oftentimes there's quite a difference in price between these two. The price point of the supplements may be a quarter of what they are the replacements, but they're not replacements. They're just supplements. When we look at these products, there should be a minimum of 100 grams per dose for absorption. I prefer the ones that have at least 150 grams, especially if we're talking some bigger calves, like we talked about that example earlier. 100 grams of IgG will not necessarily provide enough protection for this calf. It'll put it into that gray area, that 6 to 10 range. It will provide some protection, but just not quite enough. We also want to look at these products and make sure that they have fat, vitamins, minerals, etc. They're also important to have these. So so if the product is labeled for, the other thing we want to look at is the product labeled for bovine immunoglobulin or just globulin proteins. We will see other proteins. If they're just measuring the protein level, we'll see that there won't be enough immunoglobulins, there won't be enough antibodies. So like I said, don't let the number on the package be the deciding factor in your decision making unless there's a specific IgG level. So if it says it's got 200 grams of protein, that doesn't mean anything to me. I need to know how many grams of IgG are in there. The final thing is to pay close attention to these product details. So when you're buying these products, spend some time, look at the label, make some decisions. If you're not sure of the product, get advice from somebody that understands your operation, and which would be probably the most likely person to give you some advice would be your local veterinarian to help you out on this. And like it says at the bottom there, this is an important decision on which colostrum supplement you use, because we want to get this calf off on the right hoof. Now these, if you're going to buy some of this colostrum powder, to have it on hand, sort of in the middle of the night or on a Sunday afternoon isn't the time to be running around looking for this product. This is probably going to be something that you want to decide if you're going to want to have some of this on hand or not, or whether you're going to milk one of your own cows and freeze some of that colostrum. That's a better option in the sort of the good, better, best. These replacers are a good product. Colostrum from your own cow, milked and frozen, is a better option. And the best option, of course, is nursing directly from his or her mother. Again, supplements, okay, they are just that. They're just supplements as opposed to replacers And the reason I keep going over this is because it's really, really important because both products are out there in the marketplace, and supplements are not intended for the only use of colostrum. Okay, if we did milk a cow out and we did store that in the freezer, question I often get is, can I thaw that colostrum in the microwave oven? It's okay to do it. It's not the best. The best way is to put this put your frozen colostrum into some warm water. Ideally, we talk about making it at body temperature type of a situation. Slowly thaw it out. Pour the colostrum off as it's thawing, and work at it that way. If you need it in a hurry and you want to use a microwave, set the microwave on one of the lowest settings you can. Keep pouring off the liquid as it thaws. And try not to cook it, because if we cook it, we will damage the proteins, these antibodies. So we'll do damage to them, and we'll also damage the white blood cells. Any questions?
Yes, Wayne, I do have a question here. Was there any attention or thought given to the interruption of the calf's natural desire to go looking for the teat by bottle feeding at birth?
No, I actually find the opposite. I find that that if you bottle feed it right away, it learns that sucking gives them nutrients. So I don't find that deters their desire to go after a tit. The other thing that I find that it does is because they are getting some energy from this, it tends to increase their appetite going forward.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. I don't have any more questions at this time. So, Andrea, whenever you're ready, you can take over.
Okay, thanks, Linda. I just got a quick question for Wayne as well. He talked a bit about gut closure and the importance of making sure you get the colostrum in before the gut closure, but maybe could you kind of explain what gut closure really means and what happens with that and why that's so important?
Okay, the colostrum's absorbed in the small intestine, and when the calf is born, it will allow large molecules to go through the gut wall intact. And so that's what we talk about, so that the bowel is open. It's allowing these large molecules to flow through intact. So that is the antibodies, the white blood cells, and unfortunately bacteria as well. So naturally, after it's born, there's a reflex that happens, a physiological reflex, and these holes that are allowing these large molecules to enter the blood start shrinking down and start closing up. And anything that goes into the gut, so as it flows through, it causes this reflex and causes these closures. So just think of them as holes that just close up as milk or colostrum or anything else flows through the gut. It triggers this reflex to close, and the reflex will happen with time anyway, and they start closing almost right after they're born. They start closing up.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Wayne. Thanks for the presentation. I think there was a lot of really good, important information to think about as we get into calving, as some producers are into it right now, and as we are leading up to getting rolling. So thanks a lot, Wayne. Linda, if you want to give the presentation screen over to Shawn, we will move into our next presentation from Shawn Cabak. He's going to talk a bit about pre-calving and post-calving nutrition and how we can kind of maximize the production from our cows during this critical period. So I'll hand it over to you, Shawn.
Good afternoon. The second most important cow nutritional period during the year is the pre- and post-calving periods, and it's critical that you feed your cows adequately during this time. So we will discuss how you can do this in the next 15 minutes or so. The goal of the cow-calf producer is to keep the feed costs low. The greatest expense in keeping a cow herd is the feed costs, and the MAFRD's recent 2013 cost production is a little over $300 for straw and feed, and this includes 30 days of extended grazing. So if you're not practicing any extended grazing, these feed costs would be even higher. But you must still meet your cow's nutritional requirements. So poor nutrition will affect the reproduction and production and cost you money in the long run. What is the cow's role in the herd? Every cow should produce a live and healthy calf each year with good growth potential. Proper nutrition will improve disease resistance and allow the cow to rebreed on time. So what do we need to develop? Some feeding strategies. You need to have a basic understanding of the production cycle, which we will cover in more detail. You want to know and prepare for changes in nutritional needs. Just going to move this screen over. There's something blocking it. And with the last cold spell that we had, hopefully producers made some adjustments. And to plan the feeding program, you need to feed test. The only way to be able to balance a ration to meet the animal's requirements is if you know what you're feeding. And our feed quality can differ from year to year. And this year we did see some variability in our forages and our feed samples. By feed testing, you can look at different alternative feed sources, which may help lower your feed costs. And you should consider splitting the cows into different feeding groups. It's more work, but your cows will thank you in the end. So there are basically 4 cow production cycles that are important. There's breeding to weaning, weaning to early pregnancy. There's the last 2 months of gestation, and calving to rebreeding. And the last 2 months of gestation, which is pre-calving and then post-calving, are your 2 most important nutritional periods in a cow's cycle. And that's why you want to save your best feed for after calving. So in the last 2 months of gestation, we have rapid fetal growth. The cows need to be on a rising plane of nutrition. Basically, the energy and protein requirements increase, and we need about 55 to 57% TDN and 8 to 9% crude protein. After calving, this is the highest nutritional demand on the cow, and the TDN must be in the high 50s to low 60s. Our crude protein requirements are 10 to 12%. And this will differ a little bit depending on the milking ability of the cow. The cows are producing milk, they have to resume heat cycles and breed on time. They're growing if they're a young cow, so our intakes will increase. And this is where poor nutrition can delay rebreeding and decrease calf performance. So what are some of the factors affecting nutritional requirements? Large frame cows need more feed than small frame cows. Makes sense. Also, a lot of times our larger frame cows may be harder keepers. They're not as easy fleshing as some of the small frame cows. A thin or poor body condition score cow needs more feed than a good condition cow. Have a little more insulating factor if there's a little more fat on the frame. A lactating 2-year-old requires a higher level of energy, protein, calcium, and phosphorus than a mature cow. It's growing, and it has to provide milk for the calf. Some other factors affecting the nutritional requirements is the milking ability. Everyone knows Simmentals are generally a lot higher milkers than, say, Herefords. So they have to be fed adequately, otherwise they can lose condition. Depending on the temperature, if we're working on a base of, say, -20, if our rations are balanced for -20 and then all of a sudden they drop to -30 for a long spell, we need to increase the energy requirements 10 to 15%. Also, are you practicing bale grazing? In a lot of bale grazing scenarios where the animals are are out in the open where they don't have much shelter, even if they have portable windbreaks, they're still going to have some wind chill. Do they have loose housing versus dense bush? We've seen wind chills this winter below -40, and that takes a lot of extra energy to keep those cows in condition and to keep them from dropping condition. I guess the other factor, if they're in a bill grazing situation, if they're eating snow for water and the shelter is marginal, then definitely they're going to need extra energy. So anybody in that type of situation, they should be checking on the condition of the cattle, and if they are dropping condition, they will have to take some action on that. It's a good idea to separate the cows into different feeding groups. It is more work, but you want to match the nutritional needs depending on the age of the cows. Our mature cows will be in the best condition, and this will be your biggest group. Our bred heifers and second calf cows should be split off. Younger animals do not compete for feed as effectively as mature cows. Not only are they growing, but they have to look after the growth of their calf. And then the thin and old cows need extra energy to get through the winter. To keep things a little simpler, you can group 1, 2, and 3 together and feed them a little better feed and a little more feed compared to your mature cows in good condition. So what are the nutritional impacts if the rations aren't balanced properly? Calf birth weights can be reduced if the energy isn't adequate. Colostrum production, quality and quantity can be lower. Calf health can be affected. Vitamin A is important for having live and healthy, vigorous calves at birth, and that's why supplementation in the pre-calving period is important to the cow, even though sometimes the producers will inject them at birth, but it may not be quick enough. Milk yield can be reduced, rebreeding interval can be longer, and conception rates can be reduced as well without adequate nutrition. So cow's condition at the start of winter has a major effect on the amount and quality of feed required. A thin cow has greater difficulty to gain weight during the cold winter versus putting on the condition during the warmer fall period or during the summer on grass. So for thin cows to gain weight in the winter, you either need very good quality forage or you need an energy supplement such as grain or pellets. A lot of times our forages don't have enough energy to be able to put condition back onto the cows in the winter. That's where a silage that has higher energy can add condition to the cows. So we'd like to see our cows in a body condition score of 3 to 3.5 on a 5 scale. In this condition, they don't actually need to gain body weight, but they need enough feed to gain weight equal to the developing calf and associated pregnancy tissues. And that would average anywhere from 150 to 180 pounds per cow, which is mostly lost the day of calving. I like to say fat on the back is like money in the bank. You do have a little bit of a reserve there during a cold spell. If the animal drops half a condition, it isn't critical, versus if the cow is in a 2.5 to start, you don't have any room there for it to lose. And it is a lot cheaper to put the fat on the cow, to put it on condition during the fall once the calves are weaned versus in the middle of winter when we have the extreme cold conditions. So I guess I would ask producers what the condition of your cows are like right now after the month of cold spell below normal temperatures. Did the condition of the cows drop? And if they did, you will likely have to increase the energy in your ration. So I'll let you take a second to have a look at this girl and see what kind of body condition score you think she's in. If most of your cows are in this condition, then you have an adequate feeding program. She would be considered a 3.5 or a moderate, and that's pretty well the ideal condition you would like her in pre-calving. Her 12th and 13th rib is invisible, and she has fullness of muscle on the hip. So what do the cattle need in their rations over the winter period? The basics are energy and protein, salt, minerals, vitamins, and water. Energy is the most important nutrient required in the largest amount, needed for maintenance, growth, and milk production, but it's the most expensive. Protein is the second most important nutrient, referred to as the building block of the body, used for growth, reproduction, and maintenance. I like this graph, which shows the energy requirements of a 1,200-pound cow at 20 pounds peak milk production. Basically, the peak nutritional requirements for a cow is 1 to 2 months after calving, and this is for both protein and energy. And after that, the nutritional requirements decline until, let's see if I can bring the cursor up here. It declines up to weaning time, and that's when the nutritional requirements are the lowest. And then it starts to go up again, and this is where we want those cows to be on a rising plane of nutrition up until calving time. So when we're looking at different feeds, if we have to bring in some protein or energy, this is a feed ingredient cost calculator that is available through MAFRD. And when you look at this chart, we have the current prices of hay, straw, alfalfa, silages, as well as some of the grains. And native hay and barley straw is one of the cheapest sources of TDN. And they can be used to stretch your feed supplies in the middle of early in winter or early fall when the nutritional requirements of the cow are at the lowest. It's difficult to use those feeds closer to or after calving when the nutritional requirements are higher. They just don't have enough energy to meet their needs then. And you can see the cheapest source of protein is still alfalfa hay. And this is at $90 a ton, which may be a little higher price than average. So minerals are required for growth, bone formation, and reproduction. A legume or legume grass forage requires a 1-to-1 mineral to be fed. And basically in a alfalfa ration, you should never be low in calcium. There's lots of calcium in alfalfa, and so that's why we're feeding a 1-to-1 mineral. When we're feeding green feeds, silage, straw, grain, or pellets, then we're feeding more of a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 mineral, and just to get that calcium up, because the cereals are always low in calcium, and we will often feed limestone along with the mineral just to ensure that there's adequate calcium in the ration. And most cows will require 1 to 2 ounces per head per day prior to calving, and roughly 2 to 3 ounces per head per day after calving. So calcium is important for bone growth and milk production. Phosphorus has more functions than any other mineral, and it's often referred to as a fertility mineral. And it's important for bone and tissue development as well as milk production. But if you don't have adequate phosphorus in the ration prior to breeding, you may not have adequate conception rates or cows coming into heat. So it's very important for that. And it is one of the more expensive components of minerals. A lot of times we see minerals that have a low phosphorus percentage a lot cheaper than minerals that have a higher calcium percentage. So, and big factor for that is the phosphorus is more expensive. Trace mineral or blue salt can be mixed with the mineral to encourage consumption when offering free choice. We'll often mix it 1 part salt to 1 to 2 parts of mineral. You may need to add a bit of grain to encourage consumption. If you're feeding grain, then you can add your salt and mineral right into your grain mix, and then you know all the cows are getting adequate amounts of salt and mineral. Our vitamin A is the most important vitamin. It's measured in international units. Forages contain little or no vitamins after 3 to 6 months in storage. Grains contain little or no vitamins at all. So that's where we basically don't count any vitamin A being in our forages once it's been in storage for more than 3 months. And once they've been off grass for 2 to 3 months, there's virtually none that's stored in the liver. So vitamin A can be stored in the liver and used when needed. It can be fed daily, weekly, monthly, or injected once every 2 to 3 months. A premix can be blended in with grain or mineral, or it can be added to the water. And a pregnant cow requires 40 to 50,000 international units per day versus a lactating cow 60 to 80,000. Just getting near the end of the presentation, just a couple possible feed concerns this year is nitrates. Rations can take up to 0.5% nitrates before there's any feed reductions required or dilution, as long as you keep your nitrates below 0.5%. Moldy feeds can cause mycotic abortions, so you want to avoid that prior to calving. Endophytes can be tested for in perennial ryegrass or tall fescue. Winter tetany or magnesium deficiency can occur in straw or grain-based rations, and sulfates can tie up copper. So just in summary, balance the cattle ration to meet the animal's requirements. Adjust the ration to accommodate for changes in body condition and weather. Take stock of your feed supplies. You have more options available the earlier you adjust your ration. So, for example, we had that extreme cold in December. We would have used probably an extra 15 to 20% more feed during that period. If you were marginal on your feed supplies at the beginning of the year, you really want to take stock of what you have left. Do you have enough to make it through to probably the May long weekend when normally we get grass? And if not, then look at sourcing additional feed now or making changes to your ration. Because like I said earlier, it's easier to stretch your feed out with some straw when the animal's requirements are lower midwinter versus at calving, pre-calving or post-calving. And the pre- and post-calving periods are a cow's most critical nutritional periods. And with that, are there any questions?
I don't have a question for you, Shawn, but for Wayne, there was another question came in here. Are you still there, Wayne?
Nope, I'm gone.
Okay, so what is the length of storage ability of colostrum replacers and supplements?
The powdered ones, I would go by the best before date that's on the package. If you're talking about a home product, you can get away with 13, 14 months in the freezer, but it starts deteriorating rapidly after that. And the proteins tend to stay, so the immunoglobulins tend to stay intact, but the white blood cells tend to get fragile after time, so you're not getting any benefit from them.
Okay, great. Andrea or Shawn, were there any other questions that you had for Wayne or Andrea for Shawn?
Okay, I don't have any further questions. If there's no other questions or comments, I would like to thank both our presenters, Shawn and Wayne, for taking the time to come on today. I think they presented some really good, important information, so hopefully everyone got something out of it, and thank you all for joining in and listening in. So with that, thanks everyone. I'll give it back to Linda to close down.